Sean, how's it going, man? Another ep together. AMA, how you doing?
Yeah, great. How are you?
Not too bad. You just got back from Fiji.
Fe- Yeah. Yeah, it
Awesome.
was it was awesome. That's a good word for it.
Yeah. How long were you guys out there for?
8 days. And
Okay.
we're on this little island called Tavarua. It's literally a heart-shaped island in the middle of the ocean and some of the best waves in the world there. It was epic.
Is
it
this
was
a
awesome.
surf trip, family trip, work trip, all of it?
No work, just surfing family. So it was great. It's something for everybody.
I love it, man. I love it. In fact, I was surprised that you could record today because I thought that's deer hunt season. So I thought maybe Sean's out, trying to fill a tag like Ryan is, I think, this week.
Yeah, he is. I'm running around, but I'm doing most of it on my property right now. There's
Yeah.
another spot I have that's like 45 minutes from me, but we today had the weather change. It was literally 2 days ago, 80 degrees, and today it's in the 40s. And so
Yeah.
it was like quick
The
shift.
difference of hunting across the US, right? Like out west, we're trying to get tags, we're in a lottery system, and then all you guys in the Midwest and further east, it's all about who you know that has property that you can just hunt on. It's actually quite
Exactly.
annoying because you guys just like, oh, I can do whatever I want, just shoot on some property. Meanwhile, in the Rocky Mountains, we're all like begging for a tag to a crappy zone, I don't know.
Yeah, my friends who don't know, I tell them that there's no tags out here, and they're like, "Wait, what?"
Yeah.
And I'm like,
Yeah,
"Yeah, we
you could
get
just
two
hunt.
bucks a year
Yeah.
and up to three does a day. There's no limit. So
Yeah.
it's like
Maybe you need to
Hawaii.
invite me out and I can hunt on your property. The only benefit or the close thing to that we have is, and I forgot the name of the tag, but it's like when you own farmland,
Hmm.
the uh fishing game will actually give you like so many tags to keep
Yeah, you get landowner
deer off
tags.
your property. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so those you can pop out in your field, but anyhow. Cool, man. So we have limited time. Let's get into it. We're going to field questions from two sources. We have a handful of questions from the Iron Council. That is our exclusive brotherhood. To learn more, go to orderofman.com/Iron Council. And then we're also going to field a couple questions from our Facebook group, facebook.com/group/Order of Man. Let's get into it. Dustin Stokes. I am experienced with CrossFit, but I have two boys ages 11 and 13, and I like to get them involved in weightlifting, fitness, and etc. with peers their age and an environment led by a coach. They aren't involved in any team sports. Schools don't provide anything like this, and my CrossFit gym is stacked full of adults and not a great option for kids. I've Googled, searched the web, but not finding much out there at this age. Curious your guys' suggestions for what to search for, what other dads do to intentionally get their kids around other mentors and peers that enjoy fitness outside the team sport environment. I can obviously take them to work out myself, which I do, but I'm looking for ideas beyond that.
Hmm. I saw this question. I was thinking about it. I mean, it's hard if it's not in the schools because,
Yeah.
in where you are in the school system, most sports start in middle schools, and then most of those have a gym. Like my boys had a little gym in their middle in for football. So football was the sport everybody knows. They're lifting. Um, but even though they had it in the middle schools, they don't do a ton of lifting. I know Brecken was
He's
he
in
was starting
powerlifting.
powerlifting,
Yeah.
and they had that out in Maine when Ryan was out there, but I don't think they have it out in Utah where he is now. So I think it's a lot of it's area specific.
Yeah.
But here were my major thoughts. My boys, even though they had access to it, never really lifted, but they're super strong, mostly through just playing football. Um, and now they're doing wrestling because that's in the schools. And football and wrestling, they should have rec leagues or rec clubs, or clubs to be able to do that in, no matter where you are. You may have to drive a little bit to get to some of those. But I know we talk a lot about jujitsu. I can tell you my kids did I was doing Kempo before jujitsu, and so were my kids. And then we transitioned into jujitsu, and the strength curve, for all of us once we were in jujitsu was giant. And I can tell you, like, most of the muscles they have now, they built through just running and being active, playing football, and jujitsu. And that for their age, I think is better workout anyways. And then I had a trainer. I have my trainer that I had. He's worked with my boys a few times to give them body weight and core workouts that they've incorporated in the last couple of years. Which obviously there was a cost to that, but it was worth it because they got technique and how to do it right and what not to do from him. And because it's core and body weight stuff, I'm not worried about them going too hard and, getting bad habits and hurting themselves at a young age. So that's what we've done.
Yeah. And I'm assuming that's why a lot of CrossFit gyms don't touch kids. Cause I'm like, they'll probably get these kids injured, right? I mean, liability. Personal, Dustin, but like even a lot of CrossFit gyms, you're like, oh my gosh, there's all bad form all happening all over the place, right? So maybe that's why they avoid it. The only things that come to mind is the powerlifting route. That's really a recommendation probably that Ryan would say, because Brecken probably found lifting right through powerlifting. So I'm not sure if you've checked Googling like powerlifting clubs for kids. The two things that come to mind for me is both of my girls do gymnastics. They are so strong, insanely strong. And so I would actually look at maybe getting your boy into gymnastics. Without a doubt, that's around everywhere. Some of those schools are actually females only. So that's the tougher part, is if you have a boy, it'll be harder to find gymnastics just for boys or for a co-ed or whatever. But I'm planning on it. I plan to put my 5-year-old in gymnastics just so he can learn body strength and control. And my girls are wicked strong. In fact, I intentionally try not to do any core exercises around my daughters, because they'll be like, oh, Dad, you're doing it wrong. Do this. And I'm like, I can't do what you're doing. Like, they're so insanely strong. So gymnastics. The other thing that crossed my mind is, and is popular, is that kind of that warrior kid or American Warrior gym kind of stuff. There's a couple of those gyms where we live. And these kids, it's almost like gymnastics, to be honest with you, but it's those like obstacle courses and stuff from American Warrior. And that might get you kind of what you're looking for, as well as high intensity training, but it's a little bit fun for the kids, but they're going to get a lot of strength. And of course, I'm always an advocate for jujitsu and wrestling, but maybe, I don't know, maybe gymnastics, maybe some American Warrior obstacle. I don't know what those schools are called, and actually, I even think about like rock climbing gyms. Those kids are wicked strong too. So hopefully that gives you some ideas. Anything else, Sean? We're probably stumbling here a little bit.
No, nailed it. I think that's it. I would just caution, like with our kids, especially as guys, we tend to, especially if we like something or love doing something and want them to do it with us, we tend to go ahead of where they should be. I've done that with my kids with surfing even. And my oldest, my daughter, I kind of traumatized her at a young, because I wanted her to surf and like it and enjoy it. And I pushed it on her in the wrong conditions. And then she ended up not wanting to do it at all. So just be careful of that you're so passionate or excited or wanting to get them involved in those things that you push too hard. Make sure that whatever it is, out of all the things that we even recommended, that it's something that they can get behind and be excited about.
And that they find joy in it, right?
Yeah.
That it's not like the grind, because then they're just going to push away. That's a really good point. All right, Paul Sanote, Kip, from hearing you speak, I know you have a blended family. Was there any point that you felt it didn't work? Specifically, did you feel that the additional children took you away from your own children? I've gotten that question before. It's a really interesting thought. Some context on my challenge. My daughter's mother and I are no longer together, but we're on very good terms, and we're together for 20 years, and I have an 8-year-old girl. My partner has has a 2.5-year-old. Dad is not on the scene, alive, but not involved. We have spent a year trying to blend our family, but it doesn't work. With the compromise on both sides, scheduling doesn't work. Parenting styles are massively different. Job schedules are vastly different. While I'm protecting and providing, it feels like I'm not 100% able to take care of my daughter's need, and I feel guilty. I'm also not taking care of my needs due to the hectic schedule work. My thoughts are, oops, sorry, I scrolled too far. My thoughts are to the end, the relationship, and focus on my daughter and me. Or keep it going, but step back and set additional boundaries to prioritize my daughter with a view to grow the family together slowly over the coming years and accept that our version of a blended family looks vastly different to a typical family setup. So
you start with this one.
Well, I mean, I can't start with this one, but let's lay this out, right? Because I don't think this is, there's a blended family conversation in this, but there's just a family conversation to this, right? You know, and I know, Sean, we even in a non-blended family experience, we're going to have different parenting styles. We're going to see things differently. Schedules are going to be hectic. They're going to be chaotic. You're going to show up one way. Mom's going to show up the other way. You might be undermining each other. Like a lot of this exists in a non-blended family scenario. I think the only thing that gets added to this that could be very dangerous is this idea that my daughter comes before my spouse, whether it's blended or not. And so let me address that, and then we can talk about schedules and different parenting styles. Is that fair? Here's the deal. You're in or you're out. And your commitment is to your spouse, not to your kids. And I know that is hard because right now you're saying, no, my daughter, what I'm hearing is my daughter's the priority, not my spouse. That's never going to work. Can you imagine that? If your wife chose your kids over you? Now, I'm not saying we don't do what's right and we're not amazing parents and we don't put our kids first, or we don't make our kids a priority, but they can't be a priority over your spouse. They can't. And those kids are going to leave. Eventually, they're going to leave. And you need to make your partnership with your spouse and how you raise your kids the priority, not the actual kids themselves. And now why? Here's one of the considerations. Your daughter is probably better off with you figuring out how to co-parent with someone else, how to get on the same page, figure out schedules, figure out boundaries, and model what it looks like to be a great husband and have a mom than it is for you to abandon all that and just make her the priority. I really believe that. Kids need a mom and a dad, not just a really good dad. They need you. They need a mom, and they need to see you struggle, argue, disagree, and figure out life with a spouse. That's part of the value of parenting. That's the modeling that you're giving them. And you being a single parent is not going to benefit her in that way. I so believe that. Okay. Now, with that said, parenting styles. You want to jump into that one? How do we handle the difference between mom and dads? Because I really do feel the parenting style issue could be an issue agnostic of a blended family scenario. So what's your thoughts there, Sean?
It's the biggest thing that stood out. And I was really interested to hear your take on it. And I think it's in alignment with mine, because even though I'm not in that situation, I grew up in a blended family. I'm the only kid from my mom and dad. And so my mom had a boy and a girl, and then my dad had 3 boys. And so I was that kid that they were probably having this worry about.
Yeah.
And so
you're the problem.
Yeah, I was the problem for sure. But that's the thing, is like, what stood out the most is how he said, I know it's not the typical blended family situation. Dude, there's no typical any family situation.
No
And I
way.
think I think we all get hung up on what
The
it's
way it should
supposed to
be.
look like,
Yeah,
right? Like everybody wants it to be like Leave It to Beaver or something like that. That's like this perfect
totally.
family
You,
scenario, and that
Sean,
just doesn't
can I
exist.
really add something really quick? Because I think this is a really profound statement. When you hold on to unmet expectations, and that's what this is the expectation of what it should look like. Then what we do is we say, well, it shouldn't be this way. So now my decision is what? Walk away? No, the decision is, so what are you going to do about it? How are you going to show up powerfully regardless? Because guess what? It is what it is. And I trust me, blended families are tough. There is an element of tough. And the biggest element is that it's, to be frank, it's your kids just don't respect you as much. That's the toughest part. They're not going to love mom as much as they would their biological mom. And they're not going to love dad as much as they love their biological dad. That is reality. And I feel passionately about that. And it's okay. So the question then is, what are you going to do about it? And how do you mitigate it and still show up powerfully? But let go of the way it should or should not be. You're going to wrap your head and be running around as a victim of it shouldn't be this way. Well, guess what? You're in a relationship. It is this way. So now, deal. Sorry, Sean, go ahead.
No, I mean that is where I was headed. There's no typical anything. And so you just have to do the best you can do. And I was going to say what you said, Kit, that your focus, it does sound like his daughter is more important to him than the woman that he's with by what he's saying.
Yep.
And I mean, to me, that's more of a red flag than how do I make it work perfectly, right? If you find somebody that you want to make that priority, then I think that's a big indicator. But if you find somebody that you want to keep your daughter the priority with, that may not be the right woman, right? I mean, I'm not really the one to say either way, but just in the way that you worded it, that's how it felt to me. So I think Kip's right, though. Any relationship, a mistake that parents make, and this is if you're together or not,
Totally.
is like Kip said, putting the kids first. And when they know that, then they manipulate those relationships.
Totally.
They use it to their advantage. And especially, and I mean, it happens in a family that lives under the same roof, but especially when they're under different roofs. And I saw this happen because my mom went through a few marriages, and my brother and sister there, I watched them manipulate my mom and their dad and my stepdad when my mom got remarried again. And I, from the outside looking in, watched them manipulate those situations because they knew that my mom kind of put them as the priority. And you just don't want to be caught in
Totally.
that situation.
Now, is it possible, right, that your current partner, because here I am saying, hey, put your partner first, right? And then your partner might be like, I don't give a crap about your daughter, right? It's about my kid. Well, is that a partner you want to be with, right? And so it's not as black and white as I probably said it was, right? You guys need to have some alignment, but if you're out of alignment, then that's not the right person. And what you might be falling into a little bit here, and I'm going to project a little bit on single moms that get remarried. They have been conditioned to believe that they could leave, take their kids, find a new guy, and everything's going to be like normal, right? And I'll just plug and play Sean into my marriage, and it's just fine, right? And I get my white picket fence, and everything's going to be normal, and I just have a new dad. That's not how it works. Dad is never out of the picture, by the way. He's in the picture. And that kid, you don't think Those kids will eventually be like, dad's in the picture, whether he's around or not. He has an active role in their identity. And to be frank, he should be. And so you and your spouse, you guys need to get on the same page of the importance of mom and dads, biological mom and dads, and the importance that they both bring to the table. So now let's segue into the differencing of parenting styles. I used to believe that Asia and I, my wife, had to parent the same, that we had to be exactly the same. And the reality of it is we're not the same. I bring a more stern, more of a structured approach, discipline to the table, and she brings more empathy, love, and compassion. I think it's fine the way it is. She should bring that more feminine traits to our children, and I need to bring the more stern, more of the structured approach to our children. And I shouldn't undermine her, and she shouldn't undermine me. But to think that we're always going to be exactly the same is silly. And I don't think it was intended to be that way. I think kids need both of that, but we got to be careful not to undermine each other, right? If dad says, hey, you got to clean your room before you can play, mom can't undermine him, go, oh, don't worry about it. Let me undermine dad and ruin that authority and that trust and his role in the relationship and let you do whatever you want, right? And dad shouldn't be doing something that undermines mom. But we have unique talents and ways of being as males and females that let's embrace the differences and then let's work together what's best for our kids. I feel that my separate parenting styles with Asia has nothing to do with our blended family, has everything to do with the fact that she's a female and I'm a male.
Yeah.
That's really what it's rooted in. What are your thoughts, Sean, on this? Like, are you guys the same way? Do you see that same
I mean,
dynamic?
I'm 100% in alignment with that. I mean, everything you're saying, I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what I would have said. It's the same. So I think the point is just stop getting caught up in it being a blended family and just start parenting like you would with any partner, knowing that you're going to have different ways that you go about it. My wife and I are very different in how we parent, but we talk about it all the time, and so we definitely, there's things we're on the same page with, so we don't get manipulated, like I was talking about, by our kids. But it's never going to be exactly the same.
Yeah. And you're going to screw up, and then you're going to have to pivot and adjust and learn and everything else. One thing, let me add this one thing to the conversation, if you don't mind. When you have a blended family, you're going to find opportunities where your spouse is going to want to choose the kid over you. When that happens, be careful not to perpetuate that thought process. And you got to be really careful. For instance, if there's a gist where, let's say, my wife made her son a priority over me, you don't think that shows up? And then now that almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy for me. And there's a little bit of competition. Be very careful. That could be so damaging. Your spouse right now, or your partner, she might be under prioritizing your daughter. Why? Because you're prioritizing your daughter over her. And there might be a struggle here where she's like, no, I'm your world, not your daughter. And so she's downplaying, and that pendulum is swinging, and she's downplaying, trying to downplay your priority of her in your relationship because you're not putting her first. Be very careful not to get into that. Now, you might have to establish some boundaries. Hey, I'm not showing up as good as a father. I want to do a better job with my daughter, but I want to do a better job with my daughter with you still being the priority, that our relationship's a priority. And I need your help to make sure I'm a good dad. But I want to be really clear. I'm not choosing my daughter over you. And I've seen this. I've seen this in, to be frank, in my relationship. I've seen this with my in-laws. where you get this competition dynamic between mother-in-laws and mothers and daughters and sons and dads, be very careful. And it is because we're not clarifying the priority. And we got to make sure that our spouses are the priority and we're aligned with how we're going to raise our children and show up powerfully. Okay.
Yeah.
Anything
And
else, Sean, that you would add to that dynamic of discussion?
no. And the whole reason for all of it is because we're saying this, but didn't really kind of elaborate the reason. It's because that's what your kids need to see. They need to see that healthy relationship if you expect them to ever be in a healthy relationship. Because our goal isn't for us to be there for them their whole lives. Our goal is to make them independent of us. And so they need to know what a healthy relationship is and looks like if we expect them to have the best chance at that in their adult lives.
Yeah. Yeah. And if it helps you, like, think about your spouse as your daughter, right? What kind of man do you want her marrying? One that puts his other kid a priority over her? Like, work through it and try to be self-aware in regards to how we might be showing up as parents. All right. Robert Fraggs, when life becomes challenging as a leader, what are some things that you guys do to stay calibrated for life's tougher challenges? Thank you.
I saw this question too earlier, and the overwhelming thought I had is leadership is never not challenging. And so the only way you're not going to get those challenges is if you just don't take on the role as a leader. And so, when he said the more challenging things, it's nothing prepares you for the most challenging things or the more challenging things. Those things,
challenging things,
other than doing challenging things. And that's how you learn. And that's how you take on leadership roles. That's how you excel and grow and learn and become better. And there's no other way to do it. And so all taking leadership responsibility does is it gets you a little further ahead of the curve because you tend to be in more conversation and have more experiences that equip you with being able to make better decisions when the really challenging things happen. And so the only thing you can really do to prepare is to keep taking on those leadership roles and doing the best to your capacity. Along the way, finding good mentors, that you can model after and bounce things off of and get help from, and just continue to do your best. That was my from the hip thought on that when I saw it.
There's two things that have helped me. The first is I evaluate the current circumstance and where I want to go. And is the current struggle and toughness really that tough? So let me give you an example. If let's say I'm doing a conference, right? And I'm stressed out about it. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm nervous or whatever. And I think, oh my gosh, there's only like 100 people in the conference. If I can't do this conference really well for 100 people, then I'm certainly not going to do it well for 1,000. Mm-hmm. Right? If I can't pull this thing off, if I can't succeed in a company of 200 people, then I'm definitely not set up to succeed in a company of 500. So, and I don't know why, but it kind of downplays my current and looks at it and helps me see it as a rep. This is a rep. This is a rep on my progression of wanting to do bigger, better things in the future. And I got to figure this out to be able to ever have that level of impact that I'm seeking for. And so I kind of look at the current circumstance, not downplay it, but just kind of see it for what it is. And this is a rep opportunity. Now, the other thing is it's really hard. Like I get in the jar, man. I get so deep in the jar. I can't see the label. I'm stressed out about the way things should be, the way things shouldn't be. And we got all this work to do. And I kind of really, to be frank, kind of beat myself up quite a bit when I get stressed. And one thing that has really helped is to detach and just look back strategically at what's going on. What's the situation? What's the bigger picture that I'm looking at? Get out of the weeds of the tactical, start thinking strategically. What's the long-term strategy and plan? And then the other thing that really helps me is, and it sounds silly, but just prioritizing and executing. It was funny, like a year ago when I first got an executive assistant, it was really great. She says, Kip, I need to understand all the things that you're dealing with so I can help. We scheduled an hour meeting, ended up taking like 2 or 3 hours, and I brain dumped all the things. 2 or 3 hours it took me to dump all the things that I need to do that are just overwhelming my mind. And that's work, let alone I add family to it, right? And I throw houses into it and projects that are around the house, or just silly things like all the crap in the garage that I need to clean up, and the fact that my bike's expiration is expired and I want to get that done before winter. Like, there's all these things. And when I feel it all, it's exhausting. I'm stressed and life is tough. But when I just go, hey, you know what? I can't do it all. But what I can do is prioritize the top items and win on the top priorities. And now I know I'm making momentum, and then I just reprioritize, and then I just execute. So when you feel overwhelmed, like there's so much, all that we can really do is identify the important items and execute on them and find value in that. And I think it goes without saying, but balance is important here, right? Sean, it's important, right, that you went to Fiji. It's important that you get your surfing in. It's important that you get your workouts in. If we're all in the weeds constantly as leaders and it's all about work, we're not setting ourselves up to win. We need that balance, because sometimes it's not just about the effort and the work getting done. The other measure is the impact. Sure, I can come into the office and I get lots of stuff done, but if my impact is net negative because I'm pissed off, because I don't have margin, because I'm not taking care of myself, is it really beneficial that I got all these things done, but I'm walking around like a complete jerk? You know what I mean? And I'm eroding relationships because I'm in a bad mood. Be careful, be mindful of how we're showing up. And sometimes that how is determined by the margin and the balance that we have in life.
You know, and like everything that we're talking about is still, it's kind of like what we were talking about with the relationship stuff. We all have this expectation of what it's supposed to be like, where really when you take on, and the more leadership you take on, and the higher up the quote unquote ladder that you get in that, the more you become a juggler of crises, you know, or mini crises.
Totally.
Because most people aren't good at managing their emotions and doing the things you're talking about, which is what you're talking about, managing your emotion through it, where you're staying never too high, never too low. You have to manage being even keel through that. And so that's what you start to get better and better at. But most people aren't. Most people freak out. Most people, you know, overreact. Most people, you know, or they react without thinking, you know, kind of ready, fire, aim. And so as they are going through crisis, the more experience you've had with doing the planning and knowing how to execute and knowing how to attack these issues. And like I have a deep rooted thing in me where I don't even use the word problems. It's challenges. I've replaced the word problems with challenges. Yeah. Everything's a challenge. And so for me, my initial reaction to a crisis is, okay, that's how do I approach this challenge? You know, what needs to be done, and I can do it with a level head. And so what you start to find is even the difficult challenges as they're happening to you, because you've gone through that process Kip is talking about so many times, you really just attack them the same.
Yeah,
You assess and you do the OODA loop, right? It's kind of that same thing
totally.
every time. It's why they teach it in the military.
And you do it quickly so you can learn, pivot, and adjust constantly
Yes.
over and over. I really like that, Sean, that you brought that up. And I feel here's the other thing about leadership. What are we typically dealing with? People. And we have to work with people that are not perfect. They're not systems. They're not processes. They're not exact. They're different, all of them. And they have different skills and different issues and different stories and different areas of where they are. And man, the more I've held on to how I think people should or should not be, it probably causes more problems than not.
Yeah.
If I have
Yeah.
all these set expectations of how my team should be, it is disruptive. I need to meet them where they are. Otherwise, I'm not going to be in a position of helping them. If I'm so set on Sean and the way he should be or should not be, I'm not even learning. I'm not saying, hey, Sean, what do you need? It really think about that. A lot of hardened expectations that we have on people is a form of command and control. We're seeing them as objects and we're seeing them as the way they should or should not be versus us dealing in reality and saying, what are the unique talents of my people? What are the unique challenges of those individuals? And how do I serve and support them in their growth and their service of their job? And the answer to that is going to be different for every person. Man, I've seen this so many times where we'll pull up executive reports and it's so like, it seems to make sense, right? But if you pull up a report and go, all right, who's our lowest performers? And then we have the audacity to go, oh, what's the one thing that we need to, what knob do we need to turn to get those 50 people to execute? We're talking about people. And the answer is not a knob that affects all 50. The answer is in me going to that person and going, Chris, how do I support you in your role? Let me understand your challenges that you're experiencing. And it's unique to Chris a lot of the time. That's why decentralized command is so critical, because you can't sit in an ivory tower as an executive and have control over hundreds of people. It's not that simple. It's really not. And it's quite arrogant and naive to think otherwise. You're dealing with people. We have to understand our people, and people are different. They're not the same, and they all need something slightly different. And that's the role of a leader, not to manage people, to lead them. And to lead someone, you need to know them. A little bit of a rant. I'm sorry.
No, but that's good. And that honestly is more advanced leadership, is understanding the personality types of the people that you're dealing with, is what you're talking about, so that you know how to communicate with them. Because all leadership is more precise communication. It's helping people to do more than they would have done themselves. And most of that is helping them understand how to use their abilities to perform. And so for us to be able to do that as leaders, we have to understand those abilities.
Yeah. That's so true. All right. Stephen Ragger has a question. I like it because hopefully you'll see the value of us grabbing this question. It's very specific, by the way, which we don't get those as often, but there's some lessons in this. Being a man of your word and honoring your obligations. I've been recruiting and hiring for a long time in my business. We have an ad, pre-hire questions, telephone interviews, text confirmation the week of, and about 50% or more of those people don't show up for the interviews on a monthly basis. Okay. So they have these preset processes that you need to do when you apply for a job. It comes to an interview and only about 50% of them show up. It's a lot of work on their part just not to show up. What does it say about you men in our society to apply for a position and confirm you'll show up, only not to show up the day of? Not sure if this is a good question or not for the podcast, right? But I think there's something here from maybe a leadership perspective of why do people do things and then all of a sudden drop the ball? And although we can't control people, what can we do to help people honor commitments? So I rephrase that question for you, Sean, to kick us off.
Yeah, I mean, you already tapped into it when you mentioned leadership. This is the perfect segue, actually, from what we were just talking about, because there's no, I mean, welcome to leadership. Welcome to, I mean, because what you're doing, if you're part of that recruiting process, you're part of the leadership team. And so, welcome. Most people don't do what they say they're going to do. It's just human nature. And so there's nothing, and I don't think it's a sign of the times. I don't think it's a current thing. It's always been that way. I mean, the world is very different than it was when I started my business 25 years ago. But people are the same. They really are. They're not more or less flaky, just people are flaky. Most of them are. That's why every company, every business, every speaker, anybody in the personal development world, you're never going to hear from anybody who doesn't talk about the 20% rule. I mean, that's it's again, human nature thing, which the 20% rule, if you don't know it, is that 20% of the people do 80% of the work. So what that means is 80% of the people are flaky. They're not reliable. They're not going to, they don't push themselves. They don't learn and grow. They don't, all of the things that we expect them to do when we're in a leadership position. Again, having those false expectations. And so I'm not saying you have to require less of people, or even you shouldn't expect less of people, but don't expect them to perform, which sounds like the same thing, but they're two very different things, right? Having the expectation that somebody should perform and the expectation that they're absolutely going to are two totally different things. And so we have to learn that balance. And as far as answering the question of what do I do, all you can do is all you can do. So you just keep doing. If you already feel like you're running and setting up those, I mean, if your follow-up is good, you have confirmation calls, emails, different things in your system for them to respond to say they're going to be there, and they still don't show, then that's all you can do. It's just a numbers game.
Totally. And it sounds like a feature. Awesome,
yeah.
Stephen. You
that's
just
a filter.
weeded out 50% of the candidates that you definitely don't want to hire.
Yeah.
by seeing that they don't commit, right, even to the interview process. And there's value in us evaluating people and understanding kind of the psychology of people. I've dropped the ball. I've done something that I know I shouldn't have done. Why do I do it? Because I don't think it's important to you. So I downplay that. Was Sean really committed to me? Was he really excited to me? So I got disenfranchised and I checked out. Like, there's a lot going on. And so there's value in us from a leadership perspective to think through, why don't people make and honor commitments? And are we black and white, right? When we are asking for a commitment. When I say, hey, Sean, can we do this? And Sean's like, yeah, sounds good. And we end the call, that's not a commitment. Hey, Sean, can you do this by this date? This is the expectation. Like, there's power in communication to help people level up and make sure that it's black and white when they're making a commitment, or we communicate the importance of the actual commitment. Like, there's lots of things, but understanding human behavior a little bit will certainly benefit us. So that way we're setting the right expectations up front.
Yeah. Yeah. I think if we have to understand our numbers in every business we're in, and that's the department you're in. So you just need to compile those numbers and make sure that that's known throughout the company, that, that's what it is. And so they're going to have to continue to put resources in to fulfill their numbers.
Totally. Now, Stephen, you might be like, man, we're doing a lot of work for a 50% fallout. So one thing that does come to mind is maybe in that initial process, when you're doing the pre-hire questions, maybe one of the pre-hire questions is their commitment, right? Question number one, are you committed to asking these questions, doing a phone interview, and then having, you know, an in-place interview? That's the commitment of this. Yes or no. And if you're not, then don't, like, stop now, kind of thing. So, and I don't know if there is, but then maybe think through ways that we could flush them out sooner than later based upon the other things. So, or maybe they're not excited about the role, right? And you have 50% of people going, I'm not interested anymore because, you know, these guys are putting me to, this is not worth like all these things they're asking me to do as part of the recruiting process. And the job description didn't sound that great. And the company doesn't really sound that great. So I'm not going to put in the effort necessary to win this job. I mean, there's power in you evaluating, taking some ownership there and going, hey, maybe I'm losing 50% because we're failing to communicate how awesome it is to work here and why they should be fighting to work here or not. So, you know, evaluate the process, see if there's maybe some areas that you guys can improve in that, from that perspective. All right, Chris Babber, do you guys have dedicated date night? Do you do a dedicated date night like every Friday, set in stone, hardened?
No, we never have. But we're great communicators with each other. And so our date nights, like I've been wanting to schedule one for us, actually, matter of fact, the last 3 weeks, and we haven't been able to get one in, you know, but we went to Fiji and we've had these other things happening. And so it's not a set in stone thing, but I will tell you, until you're strong in your communication about it and talking about it and knowing from each other that the intention is there and, you know, life may just be happening. If you're not doing it, I think it's important for couples, especially that are very focused in their jobs and in their kids, that aren't good at getting date nights done. I think for them, it's important to set in their schedule, beginning of the month, whether it's weekly, or even beginning of the month, having things set in stone on your schedule that you treat like your most important client or, you know, appointment or whatever it may be in your business or whatever your focus has been on, to get to the point where your communication's higher and you're doing those things, then I think you do need to set it in stone. And so I think it depends on your dynamic and where you land and how good you are at the communication of those things. But yeah, even though we're not now, when we first started, we used to set in stone, at kind of the beginning of the month, at least one or two. And then once a quarter, we would write in mini honeymoons that we would do, you know, and get off on these little getaways, just the two of us, you know, after we had kids, and do that as well and add that to the mix. So it's very important, but I don't think, and here's why: the challenge that comes with having a set date night is inevitably someone's going to get mad when it doesn't happen. You know, as life happens and things come up that maybe sideswipe the date night. Inevitably, I've seen that happen more often than not, where someone gets upset. Okay, now if you schedule it in somewhere and you set it in stone, then it's your job to do everything in your power to make sure that it happens. You know, and so that isn't an issue. But if you do set it every week, you know, especially as you have kids and other things, depending on how full your schedule is, that could be an unrealistic expectation to ensure that happens every week at the same time, at the, you know, whatever it is. And so you have to be able to roll with the punches.
For us, I know we'd be better off if we did.
Yeah.
Like when we are making,
because it slips away, Kip. Is that because because before you know it, all of a sudden 3 months has gone by or something?
and we're out of alignment, or we're not discussing things that we should be discussing, and etc. And so the only thing I know without a doubt would be better off if we did, when we don't. As an example of what this could look like, when we were training for like a half marathon last year, we ran almost every day together. Those were probably, our relationship was in a much better place when we were running, because we're talking about what's on our minds and what our concerns are and how stressful our day was and what are we going to do about this. And we were learning about each other and understanding each other better. That's what it was doing. And so I think there's value in the margin to make sure that you're continuing to learn about one another. And then there's the other value of that you are a priority. Kind of back to that first question around our children. If everything is a priority above our spouse, you're going to feel that.
Yeah.
You're going to feel it. I'm going to feel that I'm not the priority, right? That these events are the priority, that my kids are the priority, like other things are the priority. And if your spouse isn't your person, then who is?
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's kind of what the dedicated date night might do for a lot of people. All right. Last question, Bob Ross. Gentlemen, what type of strategies do you employ when faced with a large life stressors to calm and level-headed and not stress or emotions take control? And not let stress or emotions take control. So what's your strategy?
Can you start over again? Because that kind of lost me when
strategies
the wording in
when
there.
you're faced with life stressors. How are you staying calm and level-headed and not allowing emotion or the stress to take control of things?
I'm really good at this, as far as staying level-headed. That action part, though, is what's difficult to me sometimes. And what I mean by that is, like, the stress gets me to maybe detract from what I know I need to do sometime. That's like a personality trait of mine.
Yeah.
And so I will do other things to make me feel good about, quote unquote, getting things done, instead of placing that as a priority sometime.
Got it.
Right. And so it doesn't mean I don't have a level head.
Something else done within your realm of control.
Yes. And so, and so that is, I'm not saying that's good or bad. It's probably more bad than good. But that's the reason I bring it up, is because, that's not good either. So just because you have a level head doesn't mean you're necessarily doing the right things. So I just want to throw that out there before I go into answering this. And as far as how you keep a level head, I think we've already addressed it in the prior questions when we talked about kind of managing crisis, right? Yeah. It's from experience, and mentors help a ton with this. Having somebody you could go to talk through things with, to ask about if it's something that's really stressful. I think it's important that we have somebody to vent to and to bounce ideas off of and how we're going to approach it. I think that's where a lot of people fail. If you find yourself getting emotionally controlled by difficult situations, then that's an issue that you have with your emotions that you need to find a way to put in check. And you're not going to do it on your own. And so, you're going to need help, and you're going to need to bounce it off of people. And then through that process, you need to put systems in place, which we talked about as well, that help you attack those issues and attack those challenges. And that's going to be different for everybody, depending on your personality type as well. And so for me, it's more assess the situation, assess the importance of it, or the magnitude of it, and then assess it's kind of Covey's thing, right? I think when I think of how do
The
you
big
attack,
rocks or
yeah, I think the 7 habits of highly effective people, he has one of the best systems in place for analyzing, what's the most important and what you should prioritize. And then, from there, just start taking steps to handle the challenge. And so it's and then I mentioned, when I said all you can do is all you can do, I think that's the hard, because when we're talking stressful things, we could be talking work. We could also be talking about dealing with a family member who has stage 4 cancer, and so like the level of importance and, unimportant, we could like have a child that, is in an ambulance on the way to the hospital, and we find out at our job, and we're, 30 miles from the hospital they're on their way to, and you being emotional can get you in a car accident on the way to there, or whatever it is. And so you have to be able to assess, calm yourself down, just drive, or even better yet, if you're really smart, you ask somebody to drive you there.
yeah,
Right. And so it's like those assessments, right? There's so many scales we can go from, but I think the important part is taking that step back. If you have somebody you can bounce it off of, use them, and have them help you in that decision making, and then start taking whatever action you've assessed that you need to do. I think the number one mistake people make, though, is they take no action. They get paralyzed. They
yeah.
freak out. They
can't
or
yeah,
they emotionally act.
yeah.
And
Or they
they're both
can't
bad.
get past the what should or shouldn't be. I shouldn't
Yeah,
have to. I shouldn't have
yeah,
to. And it's like, well, you know what? We need to let go and deal in reality. And sometimes life is tough. Kids are difficult. Spouses are difficult. Jobs are difficult. It is what it is. So let
yeah,
go, deal in reality. And I really like what you said is like, and then just do your best with what you have.
yeah,
That's all that we can ultimately do. But make sure to complete the thought, right? Oh, I shouldn't have to. Yeah, okay, well, maybe, but guess what? You are. So now what are you going to do about it? Right. And now what's prioritized? What's the most important things? And then let's execute. That's what I'm hearing.
yeah.
Awesome, man.
Yep.
All right, we're up on time. So couple things, connect with Mr. Mickler on X and Instagram at Ryan Mickler. As always, you can connect with us in our Facebook group at facebook.com/group/Order of Man. And of course, to learn more about the Iron Council, our exclusive brotherhood, go to orderofman.com/Iron Council. You can learn more. However, enrollment it will not be open until mid-December for the beginning of next year. So you can learn about it. But until then, take action and become the men that we were meant to be.